welcome to episode 163 of Silver Lining for Learning. This is an episode that's been long in the making. We're so delighted to have Hanna with us today. Hanna Bondarenko from the Ukraine, from Kharkiv. We're going to talk about contemporary education and changing culture in the Ukraine. Now, Hanna is a visiting scholar or associate professor from Kharkiv, Vienna Karazhan Kharkiv National University, where she's at the Institute of International Education. As I said, she's a visiting scholar with Indiana University, and that's how I first became aware of all her great data about Ukrainian education. And I've prompted her a couple of times. I'm so happy that she joins with us today. She's got a piece, international project on Kharkiv as a multicultural city in eastern Ukraine, the advantages, contradictions, challenges, and prospects for development there. And I'm sure a lot of that has changed since that report came out. And we're going to talk more about Ukrainian educational systems and how it's being delivered today and what changes are taking place and so forth. So what we're going to do here to start is we're going to have Hanna show us a couple of slides that she's prepared for us, not too many, and then we'll jump in with some questions for her. And again, we're delighted to have you with us today. And why don't you take it away?
Good morning, dear listeners. I'm grateful that I have such an opportunity today to be with you and talk about Ukrainian education. Special thanks to Professor Curtis Bonk, who invited me today. And I want to immediately apologize for my English because I'm a not native speaker and I'm still continuing my education and improvement. As you said before, my name is Hanna Bondarenko, and I'm in Kharkiv now, a frontline city. The border with Russia is only 18 miles away from me. And the situation here is still difficult, and the city is under attack almost every day. My own apartment was damaged by Russian missiles, and fortunately, it's not yet possible to live in it. I live with a child on the outskirts of the city Kharkiv. But despite this, Ukrainians continue to live and think about the future. As a teacher, I'm sure that our future depends on education. And now I want to share with my presentation. It's only a few slides about me. I'm historian and I have a PhD in the history of Ukraine. I have been working as a teacher at Karazhan Kharkiv National University since 2015. Since 2017, I have been working with international students who study at different departments of our university. My area of interest is the study of issues of interaction and the synthesis of different cultures in multinational city Kharkiv. I'm concerned about the problem of providing education to international students during the war and the restoration of the system of higher education to foreigners after the war. In the face of the difficult condition during the war, I continue my research. Last year, I took part in several projects, such as Ukrainian Non-Residential Scholars Program at Indiana University as a visiting scholars. Also, another project is The City and War. If you don't mind, I will say a few words more in detail about these projects. I would like to express my gratitude to Indiana University, the organizers of the Ukrainian Non-Residential Scholar Program of support of Ukrainian scientists who are currently in Ukraine, because it's a great opportunity to present our scientific research, exchange ideas, methods with each others and with American researchers. In the new academic year, the second cohort of Ukrainian researchers will start participating in this program. I'm also continuing my second year in this program, which, in my opinion, has given me an excellent opportunity for self-realization and improvement my scientific research. The program included workshops and webinars with Ukrainian and American scientists. A brilliant conference was held, the fourth Taras Shevchenko conference, at which so many issues related to modern Ukraine, its problems, hopes, and prospects were discussed. I have placed a link to a video recording for 3-day conference on this slide. This year, I also became the project coordination of the City and War project, which became possible with the support of Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies of the University of Alberta. City and War is an interdisciplinary project aimed to explore, reinterpret diverse aspects of the cultural heritage of several key cities in southern and eastern Ukraine, like Dnipro, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Odessa, and Kharkiv, with a focus on state evolution since the start of the war in Donbass in 2014 and the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022. The project brings together views of academics, museums, library and archival workers, journalists, writers, photographers, and experts in other fields on the destruction, preservation, and rethinking of urban cultural heritage in Ukraine, particularly on the development provoked by Russian ongoing military aggression. So, in short, it's here what I'm doing right now.
Okay, thank you. I forgot to ask what your teaching and research interests are, but you kind of alluded to that and covered that. Maybe you didn't mention maybe your a couple of courses. What do you teach there in Kharkiv?
Yeah, I'm teach history of Ukraine, history of Ukrainian culture, history of my native region, it's called Slobozhanщина, history of my own university, because Kharkiv National University, one of the oldest university in Ukraine. So it's connected with history and cultural heritage. And
So,
as I mentioned before, I'm working with international students, not
right.
with Ukrainian.
Right. And here in Indiana, which you're now a visiting scholar, I'm also working with international students a lot. We have a lot of Fulbrighters, and I hope you have a chance to visit our lovely campus. My second question relates to the distinctiveness of Ukrainian education, both in the past, what is distinct about it, and in the present now, given the current situations, we've gone through pandemics, and now we have a war and so forth going on. So, can you talk a bit about distinct aspects of Ukrainian education? How has it changed? How has the delivery modes changed, maybe to a more blended or online environments? Or other formats, non-traditional in nature or informal. You want to just discuss that a bit?
Yeah, today we will talk about Ukrainian education, both schools or K-12 and higher education. I would I would like to say that all my theses are based on public information that is in public domain, on my own observation as a teacher for higher education institution, and on the personal experience as a parent of a junior school student. And this is very interesting, but extremely difficult and complex question, because if we talk about the specific of Ukrainian education, we need to talk in comparison with other states or different educational system. To talk about the specific of Ukrainian education, one must take in the context into account. As a post-Soviet states or other European states, I can outline the main trends in the Ukrainian education system of the last 2 decades. First, it's a reforming education according to European standards, pan-European integration. Second, it is a course on globalization. Third, it's digitalization and distant or online education. Of course, there is a certain gap between the existing legislation and the realities that exist in certain regions. And of course, if we speak about format of education and how it's changed, if we step back a little, then over the past 10 years, significant changes have taken place in educational system. Regarding the school education system, the new Ukrainian school program was launched in 2019, which expanded the academic year to 12 years. By the way, my son was just among those children who started these studies in the program for the first time. Unfortunately, after half a year from start of this program, the COVID pandemic began, which has become a huge test for entire education system many countries of the world. But now looking back to at the years of online education, I can say that they gave us an valuable online experience for several years. Many online platforms and programs for conducting online classes have been developed and tested. Therefore, when a full-scale invasion began in February 2022, many teachers and universities, professors did not stop the education process, and then in March, most schools and universities restored their learning process online. And therefore, no matter how scary it may sound, but in many ways we can be grateful to COVID, which provided us with such a valuable online education experience. Of course, online education is not without drawbacks. They became obvious already in the first half of the year of study, but during the war, they also remind of themselves. But about more on the later. Of course, recent studies in Ukraine show that the level of school education has dropped significantly in the first place, starting from 2020 when we switched to online education and but for the academic year 2022-2023 it fell critically, and I can explain why this happened. When the war began, in the first months of the war, there was often no internet and also no electricity, water, gas, and food. So, education of children receded into the background. Survival was the issue of the day. But from March 14 on, the study process gradually began to recover. It should be noted that all educational activities moved online due to the constant threat of airstrikes and the shelling of cities. There was no permission for children to return to classes. Children who relocated abroad also began to connect to these online classes. International organization estimates that more than 1 million children left Ukraine for Poland, and hundreds of thousands also moved to Romania, Moldova, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. Many teachers also went abroad and also could not start work for a long time because they were preoccupied with problems of everyday life. It is estimated that around 25,000 teachers have gone abroad. Abundantly, refugee children face and still face many difficulties in continuing their education, especially those who ended up abroad. This included the language barrier, the difficulties of adapting to a new society, problem with gadgets and the internet for regular online education, and of course, traumatized mental health. Children who left their homes but remained within Ukraine or their home region and acquired the status of internally displaced person faced similar problems. Against the backdrop of domestic problems, many people left with a minimum of things. In February, March, 2022, shops, banks, and pharmacies were closed. In the region were under attack. In these conditions, it was also necessary to independently find a school and a teacher who taught online classes. It was difficult for children to concentrate on classes when the bombings and whole of sirens were heard. In addition, children had to continue their studies, with new teachers whom they had never seen before. Furthermore, the students didn't know each other since many were newcomers from frontline cities. Almost all classes were mixed. Not only new teachers, but also unusual assignments, not the same as those given by the old teachers. The new textbooks also created additional difficulties. Therefore, the process of resuming the education for children in March-April 2022 fell entirely on the shoulders of parents who had to look for school, teachers, textbooks, and materials for the normal continuing of their children's studies, and at the same time tackle everyday problems such as finding food, housing, and sometimes work. Chair of educational organization Parents of SOS noted that in general, public education in Ukraine ended on February 24. It should be emphasized that regions with active hostilities or those near the front lines face the problem of shortage of teachers who left home or the country. We also would like to know the heroism of many teachers who continue to teach children even from bomb shelters. Many parents were unable to combine everyday life with school, which is why the Department of Education estimated that about 100,000 children never started school in the spring semester and missed entire semester. Many mothers who relocated abroad also failed to return the children into Ukrainian educational system due to unresolved problems with living conditions, jobs, and the like. However, since May, Ukrainian children living as refugees in European countries were required to attend local school. So many teachers and children ended up abroad. It was often possible to set up special Ukrainian classes. The first place was given to the problem of independently finding online Ukrainian school ready to accept students from other schools and even another cities and cities abroad. Of course, the language barrier turned out to be the most difficult for children who often had to resume studies in foreign language and based on a different curriculum. In a number of European countries, Ukrainian classes were established that taught Ukrainian as a second language. In July 2023, the International Conference of Education was held in Warsaw, at which as following data were published. About 90% of Ukrainian children abroad attended local schools, and 60% of them study remotely in Ukrainian schools and offline local schools. As you understand, it's very difficult to combine two different schools with different program, task, and criteria. Finally, we must still grapple with the problem that first emerged during the COVID-19 with currently the difficulty of adapting to online learning. Online learning is known to require a higher level of self-discipline, self-organization from students, since it can often be compared with self-education, which primary school students are not capable of. So it's maybe I speak too much. It's in a short, yes, what's
Yeah.
happening.
So that's my area of research is self-directed learning, and I'll share some of that. We're coming up with a couple of new schemes for looking at whether the classroom and the courses foster or can support self-directed learning, some guidelines actually, and then we're doing research on it as well, coming up with new schemes for analyzing the research. So that's a real interest, and maybe we could get a research project going, about student self-directed learning during the last few years in Ukraine. But we'll talk about that after the show. I think Punya wants to jump in with a question or two. And you've covered online learning and many things that we wanted to talk about today, but we're going to cycle back. I'm sure Chris will as well. I want to as well. There's some things you brought up in terms of access to textbooks and other things. And I'm interested in training of teachers and professional development and upskilling and reskilling, all these things we want to try and get in some aspects. But Punya, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Thank you, Kurt. And I just want to thank you so much for giving us this overview. It is something that I think that our listeners will gain a lot from, because, and just the courage and tenacity of the Ukrainian people at a time, of war, following a global pandemic. I mean, I can't even imagine the fact that you're still persisting in trying to, in these trying circumstances, to continue the educational system and the education of the children and the youth is just inspiring, to me personally, and I'm sure to everybody who will listen to what you just said. So, I mean, we had some questions that we had sort of planned out. I'm just curious actually about the university system, if you can speak a little bit to that in sort of the higher ed space. Like, how many universities are there, and I mean, you described very well what the K-12, the schooling system and how that's been disrupted because of people having to leave and children, getting schooling in the countries that they've moved to, even whilst trying to stay connected to the Ukrainian school system, because that is sort of your homeland. I'm wondering how this has affected the university system as well. If you can give us sort of an overview of the university system broadly speaking in Ukraine, and in particular how the last the pandemic and then the war has sort of affected that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. So as I understand, you're right. The main changes about COVID-19, yes, for university, are the transition from the classroom to online mode. And I also, as a teacher, no longer experience difficulties and problems with online education during the war. Since at my university, long before COVID, there were online platforms such as Moodle. For example, all teachers were trained with the systems and platforms. During the COVID, the number of programs that made it possible to conduct online classes in an interesting and interactive way increased significantly. To be honest, I actively use them with my students. Since in our time there is certain specificity of thinking of students who are accommodated with a dynamic picture, sometimes clip-like thinking. So, talking head in the Zoom is not interesting for everyone. Of course, there is always a line between becoming a pocket teacher, I mean that a student puts a device in his pocket and will not listen a teacher, a lecture, or becoming an animator, turns into a teacher who only offers games and puts on a show at lectures. Yeah, the further preparation of teachers for the changing realities, methods, and forms of education is of great importance. And speaking about the experience of the first war year, I would like say I would like to say that starting in the spring of 2022, both domestic and foreign instructors are conducting regular trainings, webinars, and seminars as for K-12 teachers and also for professors. And if we speak about international students, so of course, I had only online classes with them last year, and unfortunately, the number of international students in Kharkiv and another Ukrainian university, it was fallen awful, yes, and but still it should be emphasized that a lot of international students, they decide to continue and study at Ukraine, and first grade students also decided to become a student from in Kharkiv University. Of course, all classes last year we took only online. So I hope I gave answer for your question.
Thank you very much. No, I mean, I said this one, but I'll say this again. like cannot just be amazed and just be proud of being, part of this cadre of educators, because all of you, what you're doing there just makes us look good, as and the commitment to the learner and to education despite all these challenges, that is deeply meaningful. So I was wondering,
Punya, I'll add to that. In all three of us, four of us with Young involved, we've been involved in educational technology for decades, and and all of us have pushed the envelope and created new schemes and done research in the area and published books. And so to see some of what we've been wrestling with for a couple of decades, thinking about and advocating in some ways, criticizing in other ways, to see an entire country utilize some of the things that we've discussed, researched, and promoted and implemented, and going from theory to practice, to see the theory get implemented in, and the tools and technologies actually work, and to really save lives in effect. It's heartwarming for all of us to hear, these stories. It looked like Chris wanted to jump in, but I don't know. I think we're going back to Punya here. But Chris, did you have something quick to say?
No, I'll wait till after Punya.
Thanks. Yeah, so I just was curious, and you mentioned that before we started a little bit about the upcoming year. So can you give us a sense of sort of what plans, whether the ministry or your university, or broadly education in the Ukraine for the upcoming year? What is it looking like? What are sort of because again, I'm pretty sure given the vagaries of war and the dynamic sort of situation, and it's always in flux, so plans can get upended at any moment, I'm pretty sure. But still, what are you looking ahead? How are you planning ahead for the upcoming year, and what are some ways of thinking about some of these challenges that you've already laid out for us?
Thank you. It's really interesting and important questions, because September is coming soon, and considering to the experience of the last military academic year, taking into account the decrease in the level of education, for the next academic year, 2023-2024, the Ministry of Education of Ukraine has already made several changes. First, the academic year was extended by 1 month, and second, the majority of Ukrainian children as students study offline with the consent of their parents, but only if the school or university has a reliable protected shelter. In case of possible difficulties with electricity, as we had in last winter and summer, in the fall-winter period, schools will work online or will be provided with generators. The Deputy Minister of Education noted that the majority of parents support the return of children to full-time education, even in a relative frontline region. In Ukraine, about 68% of educational institutions have shelters of various types, which allows for the accommodation about 4 million students and teachers. However, it's not enough. This was announced by Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal at the government meetings recently on Friday, August 11th. According to the information of the Ministry of Education, in such cities as my hometown Kharkiv, also such as Mykolaiv, Zaporizhia, Odessa, and other cities near the front, they are currently working to ensure that from September 1st, individual schools, which will be equipped with appropriate shelters, can resume at least a mixed format of education, and part of the children could attend schools. Priority is given for primary schools to first and second grades. In Kharkiv, the possibility of conducting training in subway metro station is being seriously discussed. If the school cannot provide offline education because it does not have a shelter, parents will be offered the pursuit to temporarily enrolling students in another educational institution during military law. Uh, as a mother of fifth grade student, I can share with my own experience. I feel that the quality of education has decreased terribly. The child's communication skills are also suffering and socialization is declining. On the one hand, I'm in favor of full-time education, but I prioritize the life and safety of my child. So this is a very difficult question because time is passing, yes, and this is time is for learning. For example, in our city, it is still not known how children will study from September 1st. Regarding the education of Ukrainian children who are abroad, the government is introducing a new form of education. In selected distance schools in each region, students will study the Ukrainian component of the school curriculum. The rest of the subjects are mastered in the schools of the countries where they are. This part of the training will be credited to them automatically. The Ukrainian school component will be about 6 to 8 hours a week, so we still don't know what happening next and what happening in September. Yeah.
Chris?
Thank you.
So,
Chris.
yes. So, one of the things that we've seen in the United States with the disruption of the pandemic, which is much less than the complete disruption that war is creating for you, is a shift that needs to take place in the routines of the classroom and in the content that's taught. So people have emphasized here that you really have to start a class by checking on the well-being of the students, which is not something that ordinarily, in calm times, we would do. And also that content that somehow relates to what students are seeing in their lives is more motivating for them than content that's just kind of disconnected from the disruption and the turbulence that they see happening. So I'm curious as to whether teachers are making some of the same kinds of shifts in Ukraine in terms of spending maybe more time on well-being, even though that may not be, the topic of a class in math or science, and also in terms of looking for ways to relate the skills that students are learning to things that are happening around them. Do you see shifts of this kind in the Ukraine, in pre-college teaching in particular?
Okay, yes, I see your point, yes, and I should say that a lot of things were did for preparing teachers and instructors, yes, for raising level of online education last academic year, and a lot free events were created for teachers. Yes, for example, permanent free events for teachers are held by Ukrainian educator together with UNICEF. As part of Erasmus Plus partnership, the pan-European platform School Education Gateway was opened for Ukrainian teachers by free. Since March 14, schooling has resumed its most region of Ukraine with the help of distance learning. and Ukrainian students both inside and outside the country can access educational online material in Ukrainian. Ukrainian's main platform for distance learning is the All Ukrainian Online School. It's featuring lessons in all subjects for pupils grade 5th to 11th. In regions where internet access has been disrupted, pupils will be able to watch lessons on Ukrainian television instead. Ukrainians' online educational resources include, for example, Zanuma, its online kindergarten with classes for children aged 3 to 6. It's a collaboration between UNICEF and the Ministry of Education and Science. Additionally, the Ukrainian publisher Ranok, its morning, has made the electronic version of all learning materials free to download. Therefore, many textbooks will and remain available for free download for all grades. Also, we should mention the participation of the international organization like UNICEF, which has done a lot for Ukrainian education. The program will be rolled out by UNESCO and UNICEF in Ukraine in partnership with the Ministry of Education and Science. Will be provide children and teachers with equipment and tools for distance learning, for physical support, teach training, and educational sector planning. In addition to cash donations from both private sector partners and UNESCO. For example, Microsoft support included no-cost access to its software for students and teachers, for on and offline use and teacher training on software programs. For example, Google's contribution includes a donation about 50,000 Chromebooks. This is the first time that private sector partners have provided the necessary financing for a country. The program implemented by UNICEF focus on delivering diverse and connectively expanding digital learning centers, providing catch-up education and access to educational materials and benefits, and estimated about 350,000 children in southern and eastern Ukraine, where the fighting has been the most intense. Many well-known companies such as GPE, UNESCO, UNICEF, Google, and Microsoft have made a lot of efforts in supporting Ukrainian education. And also, in addition, a number of private Ukrainian schools opened access to basic and original education courses during the war. In some, a child can become a listener, in some take an active part in the learning process. The Ministry of Education has published a complete list for free services for high school students, including the programs, for example, Atmosferna Школа, Optima, Distance School DAR, online education in Zoom, and so on. And also a lot international schools opened access by free for Ukrainians. For example, if you pay special attention to the English language, the UK College of English involves English-speaking foreign volunteers to teach Ukrainian children. The German Language Center Goethe Institute has made the German for Beginners course in the form of virtual sessions. The discount for citizens of Ukraine is almost 100%. Not only teenagers, but also everyone can sync up. For Ukrainians, many applications for learning foreign language have become free, such as Drops, Link App, UTalk, Bible, Grammar, and so on. So, yeah, it's a great donation to Ukrainian education during this distance online learning.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I'm happy to hear that the business companies are stepping up and providing aid. I have a question about families, and I know that your family has been disrupted by this, but I'm sure you're also in touch with other families. One of the things that happened in this country during the pandemic is that families became much more involved with their children's education because the children were at home, some family members were at home, they got to see more of what was going on. The teacher might make them more of a partner in learning because the teacher is challenged by being remote. And I'm wondering if you see the same thing there, and if families, maybe ironically, are more connected to education under these conditions than they were under normal conditions.
Yes, indeed. All family are holding this learning process. And for example, in my family, I'm a teacher and I also have online classes by myself. In another room, my son, he has classes with his teacher, and it's not really great because I can listen in what happening in his class, what are the children discuss, and it's it's really nauseous. And I understand. I have only one child. In families when parents have about 2 3 children, it's really difficult to find gadgets for everyone, to find places, because in these difficult times our conditions, apartments, everything change, yes, and we don't have plenty of the space, and sometimes a family like 5 6 people in one family, they live in only one room. And if 3 different ages children have class online, first, third, I don't know, 11th grade, so it's awful, because it's so difficult to concentrate for children on their materials, to concentrate for classes. And of course, additionals, we have a lot power outages, yes. In winter, in spring, we didn't have power about 6 to 24 hours per day. So no internet, no electricity, so no classes, yes. And of course, we have uh, how sounds it's we have planet power outage and unplanned planet outage. It's every day return outage for 5 to 10 hours without electricity. And its schedule was different for teacher and for children, because different region, even in my city, we have 10 different lines. For example, in first lines, people, they don't have electricity from 1 to p.m., for example, yes. In another line, they didn't have electricity from 5 to 11 p.m. And you understand, children abroad, children are in another cities in Ukraine, and teacher, all of them, they have different schedule of planned outages, and it's difficult to find connected when everyone have electricity, when everyone have internet. And of course, all family involved in this process, because uh, now children are every time at home, yes. They should make online classes, they should make homework, all drafts, all paintings, you should help without any help of teachers. And sometimes teacher are absent, will absent at classes, so you should explain by yourself, parents should explain by yourself how they understand. It's okay if it's primary school, first or second grade, but if it's 10, 8th class and it's chemistry or biology, so it's difficult to explain in in grade, yes, explain for child what's going on, what's happening, yes. So I in this year I handle with this. I can explain, because it's primary school, was great for my son. I can explain, I could explain, but what happened in next 5th grades, it's different classes, it's begun of biology, it's begun of history, and etc. So Yes, I also waiting for this information what happening next. Yes, so and my family also waiting what happening, and we are waiting for September with some sort of scaring. Yes.
So I forgot to introduce the co-hosts at the start of the show. And for those listening, we have Christine from Harvard with us. We have Punya Mishra from Arizona State, and I am Kurt Bond from Indiana. Our fourth co-host, Young Zhao, is in the ether this week. I have two comments and a question. The first comment is Hanna has been educating us during the show with some new terminology, such as military academic year. That's the first time I've heard that expression. You have a military academic year. So it's definitely unique times. The second thing, and kind of relates to my question, and also planned outages and all this stuff. I've heard that before. Um, you know, we're reactionary creatures, human beings. You know, in southern USA, they banned online learning in Mississippi and Louisiana until Hurricane Katrina happened. And then all of a sudden it was okay to do online. I interviewed folks in the Washington, D.C. area right after Snowmageddon, and they were commenting in higher education settings in the DC area, they didn't do any online or much at the time or blended. And all of a sudden, everyone was doing blended learning. I have a handbook of blended learning, came out 15, 16, 17 years ago, and folks in Singapore and in China, you know, they were very limited, especially in China, in terms of online learning and distance learning at the time. Only select universities could offer it. But when SARS happened, all of a sudden it was okay, everyone could, and they started developing new routines of blended and fully online and new strategies and so forth. When Haiti got hit with an earthquake, all of a sudden they had online Haiti. When the earthquake hit Western China, folks in Taiwan were translating contents from MIT and other universities in the open courseware movement to provide free and open access to education. Again, we're reactionary creatures. When H1N1 happened, the Smithsonian provided free education to K-12 schools for the kids that were homeschooled. You know, the list goes on and on and on. You know, we talk about the fires in Chile. We could talk about anything. We're reactionary. So I'm kind of curious whether or not things like open textbooks, free and open textbooks, which has been a movement that's been going on for 2 decades and now has been embraced since the pandemic. And we've had David Wiley on the show as one of the first people promoting free and open textbooks. And he did the proto massive open online course, or MOOC, and things like that. And we've had others on this show as well who are early proponents. A few weeks ago, we had people from Brigham Young University who created EdTech Books, which is a free website that I'm using in my classes this coming semester. And I've put my free and open books in for my students to access free and open textbooks. So I'm curious, a couple of things. If you could talk about anything that has to do with the, you know, free and open education, open textbooks, and open textbook initiatives, open educational resources, which is a term that's embraced in Europe, what's called OER. And if you could also talk about how organizations like UNESCO or the World Bank or United Nations or someone else, or the, you know, just the European Union, have provided free and open educational resources or teacher training or professional development to get them ready to teach online. Has anything like that transpired as a result of the war, as a result of the pandemic previous to the war? Could you talk about anything that strikes you that relates to what I've discussed there?
Yes, and maybe it's only uh, made by me this terminology like military academic year, but it seems to me it's the best explanation what happening, how we are feeling, yes, this year. because it's really difficult to deal with daily life problems, with war, and we can compare in this normal life and compare with this education our children. But actually, if I speak about myself, about my family, yes, we try to do everything that our son is feeling like everything is normal, like everything is like was before. Of course, we understand Ukraine and Ukrainian education. It will not be like before war. Everything changed, yes, terribly changed. But we try to do this daily life routine as usual, because this daily life routine it's hold us in I don't know, optimism, hold us in good way, because of course we can skip everything, sit down and crying, but we should to do our job. We should to do and continue on our daily life routine, as I said. Yes, as I mentioned before, a lot partnership from Europe, America gave us a lot access for free platforms for additional. Tools for online education, and UNESCO, UNICEF, they took the first place who provided a lot of webinars, seminars for children, for their parents, yes, because they wanted to make this trauma less, and of course they created a lot for um, opportunity to download free textbooks and everything. And as I said before, for example, Ukrainian publisher is called Ranok. He opened all textbooks but free. It's available to download from first grade to 11th grade. So it's right now we can download a book and no needed to buy this. So it's a huge opportunity and a huge gift for parents during this difficult condition, because a lot of parents, they lost homes, they lost jobs, and it's sometimes difficult. In first months it was even difficult to find a exercise book, pens, I don't know, color pens for child. I didn't speak about some books, and of course for children who went abroad, of course they didn't take with them books, yes, textbooks from Ukrainian schools, and it was really easy for them download it and use textbooks and materials.
So, do you have any interesting stories that have transpired over the past 4 years since the pandemic started about learning within Ukraine? Any, personal stories, any stories you've heard that you want to share with us? Or is there anything else you would like to talk about before we end the show? Is there anything we haven't discussed that you've prepared to talk about that we, haven't brought up?
Thank you. Yes, I prepared a lot, and maybe I forgot to say something, but I need to share with my experience as a teacher. Yes, I share story with my international students, because it's a huge part of my life, and uh, I need to do this. Yes, and if we speak about, because sometimes people they are really surprising when they listen in international education in Ukraine during the war. It's cannot be, but it's exists. Yes, of course, it's clear that international education of Ukraine is now under the threat of its very existence due to the Russian aggression. It's enough to recall that in February 2022, more than two and mm, 2,500 students from different countries of the world were in the zone of large-scale hostilities. In general, since the beginning of the Russian invasion, the Ukrainian government has helped evacuate about 146,000 foreign Jews. Approximately of these, only 20,000 students are only from India. Students from Turkey, China, India, Pakistan, Africa, and other countries have gone through the difficult and traumatic experience of the war. And it's huge questions. Will they want to return after this, or will they recommend Ukraine to their friends and relatives for studying after what they experienced? And this is currently an open question. According to the Regional Department of Education of the Kharkiv region, for January 2023, about 12,000 international students studied in Kharkiv. Of course, only online. For comparison, before the war, in Kharkiv lived and studied about 25,000 international students. Despite the difficult living condition in Kharkiv, especially in the first year, teachers continued to conduct online classes. And now, maybe this is my own experience, but it was working with students, preparing for lectures and seminars that allowed me to distract myself from the experience of the war, from that fear for life. I know that I had a lot to do. I should never sit and just cry, yes. And I realize that more things I have to do, for which I am responsible to the university, to students, to my family, the easier it's for me to survive. It is work, teaching, research, and that is my way of survival. Very often, my students, international students, became my teachers, teachers of stability, endurance, and courage. For example, in the first day, the most terrible, while a significant number of population were involved in fear and panic, many international students were able to think not only about themselves, but also to help others. For example, medical students from my university, Kharkiv National University, they helped Ukrainians at metro stations. They distributed food products, organized some medical centers, they provided assistance and advice for the city residents. So I'm really proud of them, and I'm very placed that my students supported me. They wrote a lot and asked how I was doing, what about me, yes. And for me as a teacher, this is the most important gift that you can receive. It's caring for students, their humanity and kind word. And I would like to share the story of my students. It's 90-year-old Zahra from Turkey. She described, we are texting a lot, and she described her experience and stay in the city during the first day of the war. I skip all this difficult and dramatic story, but she spent 6 days in the Kharkiv, six first day of the war. But I read only her conclusions. She wrote, the biggest life lesson I have learned in Kharkiv during the first day of war, no matter where you are or what situation you are in, and if you can't change it, manage the moment and enjoy the little things. So here you see what strong and wise students we have. They were and are for me one of the source of optimism and search for self-improvement and development. Despite the war in Ukraine, international students continue their studies and enter Ukrainian higher education institution. And to a great extent, the reason is Ukrainian education as European, as well as comfortable and relatively cheaper living condition in Ukrainian cities. In this academic year just ended, I conducted an anonymous survey among international students who entered or continued their studies in Ukraine during the war. A total number is 85 students from 5th to 6th year took part in this survey. Most, of course, study online in Ukraine. They anonymously filled out the electronic questionnaire in English. And speaking briefly about this survey, surprisingly, the vast majority of international students are ready to return to offline education in Ukraine, including my city, Kharkiv, frontline city. Of course, after the end of war, the main mergers for the return of of international students to Ukraine universities, they see, first of all, improving the availability of education, improving the condition of reception and coordination of international students in Ukraine, and only then providing guarantees of security and project protected against the war. And of course, it is true that the future of Ukrainian education will not be the same as before the war. But discussion of the transformation and reform of educational system cannot be postponed until after the war. It should be taking place right now. So we have to do a lot thing, and we should faces with many important problems and challenges, and the most important things is the losses which did not escape the high school and which unfortunately continue. Educators have an important task to overcome or compensate for these losses. So we have a lot job to do, and I hope we can handle with everything. So yes, thank you.
Thank you for just a thorough overview of what's transpired during the past few years in the Ukraine. I can't think of another person who can provide as much expertise as you've provided today within any country around the world. You've really provided us with some depth here. And I want to encourage you to collect those stories. And I'm sure people in the USA and other parts of the world would love to read stories of education, and there might be opportunities for you to think about. I'm sure you have thought about some things, and I'm sure you're overwhelmed with many of your current job duties as is, but again, I encourage you to do that. I have one quick question. Did you say 90-year-old or 19? 19 or 90?
19.
19.
19,
Okay,
yeah.
19. Okay, I thought you said a 90-year-old student. Okay.
No.
I will say I'm wearing my Ukrainian tie today. For those of you who are listening on the podcast, those of you watching the YouTube can see the Ukrainian tie. Again, we've learned a lot, and the people listening afterwards are going to learn, because you're going to replay it even more, and they're going to seek out some of these resources. I'm going to be assigning it to my class. I have this embedded already in my class for this coming semester. This is going to be just a wonderful show for my students to attend, to listen to, and reflect on, and talk about. Chris, Didi will introduce our next show, but just let me give you a round of applause first, and just thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hanna.
Thank you, Hanna, and your courage and commitment are models for us all. Next week, some of you may remember the metaverse, and we've had a number of programs throughout Silver Lining for Learning on visions of immersive learning and living in immersive environments like the metaverse. We will have two guests who are part of many universities that have made a significant commitment to online, and then the head of iLearn, the Immersive Learning Research Network, which is a very active professional association in this area. So we'll be looking at leading edge immersive learning in higher education. Hope to see you next week.